Sometimes the quietest moments, where you least expect it, become the beginning of everything. There was something about borrowed dresses. They never quite fit, not at the waist, not at the heart. Elena Moore tugged gently at the side seam of her navy gown, the kind you'd find tucked behind better dresses at a second-hand shop. It clung a little too tightly at the ribs, as if even it knew she didn't belong in a room like this. The chandeliers above sparkled like galaxies. The tables gleamed in white linen and gold trim. Somewhere across the room, her childhood best friend was radiant in lace and love. But Elena was seated near the back, next to an empty chair, wondering how long she needed to stay before it was polite to slip out. She'd promised Claire she would come. "You need to remember what joy feels like again," Claire had whispered weeks ago, hands over hers. But Joy was a stranger now, and Elena was tired of pretending they still knew each other. "Sir, 41. She glanced once more at the vacant seat beside her. With her luck, it'd be someone loud, or worse charming, for the sake of being heard. She reached for her glass of water, ready to let the evening pass in comfortable invisibility. And then, a voice low, measured, just curious enough to make her look up. "Is this seat taken?" The man standing there was composed in a way that didn't feel rehearsed. He wore his suit like he wore his silence with ease. No forced smile. No eyes darting around for someone better to talk to. "Not at all," Elena replied, her voice quieter than intended. He sat, offered a hand. "Julian Callan? Elena, friend of the groom, bride," she said, offering a soft smile. "We were raised like sisters." He nodded. "I know the groom from work. Though tonight I'm just trying to avoid being pulled into crypto conversations." She laughed genuinely. Maybe the first time all month. They talked, not in the usual wedding, small talk, way, but in the way that made time feel like it wasn't being wasted. He asked about her job. She told him about manuscripts and missing commas and how stories sometimes made more sense than people did. He listened. And when he spoke, it wasn't about himself. It was about wonder and books. And the last time he'd walked into a bookstore just to breathe. At some point, he tilted his head slightly and said, "You work with stories all day, but you look like you don't believe in your own." She blinked. "What makes you say that?" His gaze was kind, not piercing, not presumptuous, just seeing no date, no wine, and you keep watching the door like you're waiting for permission to leave. She let out a long breath, not offended, not surprised, just exposed. "Maybe I forgot how to believe in something starting again," she admitted. He lifted his glass slightly. "Then maybe it's time you remembered." There was a moment of quiet between them. Julian swirled the ice in his untouched glass and said, almost to himself, maybe Elena gave him a sidelong glance. "Sure, let me just bump into a real-life love story between the salad and dessert." He didn't smile, he just looked at her with that curious, steady gaze that said he wasn't talking about fairy tales, but possibilities. Before she could ask what he meant, the music changed. The bride and groom took the dance floor, and the room softened around them. They moved like two people who had danced through storms and still chose each other. Elena felt a quiet tug at her chest, the kind that only came when watching something you deeply longed for, but hadn't held in years. Then Julian's voice, low and deliberate. "Would you dance with me?" She hesitated. Not because she didn't want to, but because part of her had forgotten how to say yes to joy. But he didn't rush her, just waited, hand out, patient, and so she let him lead her into the soft hum of music and candlelight. The moment his hand found the small of her back, a quiet shiver moved through her. Not from nerves, but from presence. He was warm, grounded, and alarmingly close. "You're not completely hopeless at this," she teased, letting her guard down. That almost sounded like a compliment, he said, a slight smirk forming. They moved in rhythm, and for the first time that night, Elena forgot the heaviness she'd walked in with. She wasn't the outsider anymore. Not while he was looking at her, like she was something worth noticing, worth staying for. Then it shattered. A voice cut in too loud, too cheerful, Julian. A sharply dressed man approached, grinning like someone who'd never been told no. I didn't expect to see you here, he said. Heard about the merger. Big win, Julian's body changed. Barely. But Elena felt it. Thanks, Robert, he replied coolly. Didn't realize you'd be here. Robert chuckled, unfazed. You know how these things go? Connections everywhere. Then he turned to Elena. And who's this, Elena? More, she said evenly. Charmed, Robert replied with a glance that lingered too long, then with a smirk. So, Jules. Your latest? Julian's eyes flashed. We're just dancing. Of course, Robert raised his hands in fake innocence. Don't let me interrupt. He walked away, but the energy stayed behind like perfume that clung. That was odd, Elena murmured. Julian sighed. He talks too much. But it wasn't the talking that unsettled her. It was Julian's silence, the way he'd suddenly built a wall, mid-step, the way the man who'd felt so grounded minutes ago now seemed edited. She didn't say anything, but she didn't need to. She knew what it felt like. When someone was hiding behind their own story, Julian turned to her, his face unreadable. Would you like some air? The room felt suddenly too full, too bright. She nodded, out on the balcony. The wind met her, gently brushing her cheeks, like someone reminding her she was real. She leaned into the stone railing, exhaling slowly, while the city lights sparkled in silence. Julian stood beside her, watching her, not the skyline. You're thinking about what Robert said, he said quietly. And she was, but she didn't answer. She didn't need to. Elena didn't look at him right away. The cool breeze brushed across her collarbone, but it was the chill in Julian's voice that made her finally turn. Should I be worried? She asked, quiet but steady. Julian exhaled the kind of breath someone takes when they're choosing their words with care. That depends, he said slowly, on whether you believe everything people say. I don't, she replied without hesitation, but I do believe in how someone reacts. And the way you tensed up when that man approached you, it wasn't just about being annoyed. His fingers drummed once, twice against the railing. I manage a company, he said at last, a fairly large one. And with that comes speculation, assumptions. People like Robert think they know everything. That's not really an answer, Elena said gently. What kind of company? He was quiet for a beat. Then investments, mergers, corporate restructuring. She raised an eyebrow. So in simpler terms, you're rich? A flicker of dry amusement curved his mouth. Would that make a difference to you, Elena? Pause thoughtful. I don't know, but I don't like surprises. Not when it comes to people. Julian studied her for a moment, not as someone trying to impress her, but as someone who wasn't used to being asked for the truth and found himself wanting to offer it. I don't usually feel the need to explain myself, he said, his voice softer now, but with you, I'd hate for you to think I was trying to be someone I'm not. There was something earnest in his gaze that caught her off guard. She watched him for a long moment, waiting for her instincts to raise red flags, but they didn't. Not this time. I wasn't expecting to meet someone like you tonight, she admitted, turning back toward the glittering skyline. Neither was I, Julian said, his shoulder brushing lightly against hers. The space between them quieted. Only the hum of the city remained a soft soundtrack to something unspoken. Then Julian shifted his tone, casual but steady. Can I take you to dinner? Elena blinked. You mean like a date? His smile was subtle, but unmistakable. Yes? A real one, she hesitated. The logical part of her whispered reasons to say no, complications, risks, the unknown. But another part, a quieter, braver part, leaned forward, inside her. Take a chance. All right, she said. The words slipping out like breath. Julian's expression warmed, something subtle, but deeply pleased, flickering across his face. Tomorrow night, he said. Elena let out a soft laugh. You don't waste time, do you? Not when I know what I'm looking for. His words were simple, but they landed with a kind of weight she couldn't ignore. He reached into his jacket and handed her a card, sleek black with raised lettering, the kind of thing she'd only seen in films. "Send me your address. I'll pick you up at 7. She took it without speaking, tracing the edge. With her thumb, Julian gave her one last glance, steady, unreadable, then turned and disappeared back inside, leaving her alone on the balcony. And suddenly, the night didn't feel so cold anymore. The next evening, Elena stood in front of her mirror, smoothing the simple black dress she'd chosen. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt like her. She'd told herself she wasn't ready for this, but the truth was, maybe she was. Maybe after all this time, she was finally ready for a story she didn't write in defense. But in hope, a knock at the door broke through the quiet hum of her thoughts. Elena paused, took one last glance in the mirror, and reached for her purse. When she opened the door, Julian stood there, dark suit, composed expression, the kind of presence that didn't ask for attention, but commanded it anyway. But it wasn't just him that gave her pause. Behind him, parked with clinical precision, was a car so polished, so sleek, it looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine. About power, her stomach tightened. Julian noticed. Something wrong. She nodded toward the car. "So, you weren't kidding about the whole business empire thing, huh?" A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Would it be a problem if I wasn't?" She took a moment, her thoughts shifting like clouds, then she shook her head. Not yet. Julian opened the door for her, his movements precise but gentle. "Then let's go." Inside the car smelled faintly of leather and cedar. The world outside faded into soft city lights as the driver pulled away smooth as a lullaby. So Elena said, turning to him, "Where exactly are we going?" Julian's eyes flicked toward her. "You'll see." She narrowed her gaze. "You like secrets. Only the ones worth keeping," he replied. 20 minutes later, the car slowed in front of a building that looked more like an art gallery than a restaurant. The kind of place where the lighting was soft, the windows mirrored, and the name wasn't even on the door. Elena wasn't sure whether to be impressed or quietly intimidated. Julian stepped out first and offered his hand. She hesitated, just a second, before placing her fingers in his. The restaurant welcomed them with velvet booths, low conversation, and a waiter who seemed to recognize Julian without needing to ask. They were guided to a table by a tall glass wall where the city twinkled like a sea of distant stories waiting to be told. Julian ordered wine without glancing at the menu. "You've been here before," Elena noted, "a few times." She leaned forward, elbows gently, resting on the tablecloth. "Do you always bring women here?" Julian's eyes found hers. "No, just you." The words weren't flirtation. They were something else, deliberate, measured. The waiter poured their glasses and vanished, like he'd been trained to sense the weight of a conversation. Elena took a sip, the wine rich and smooth. Then she set the glass down carefully. "All right," she said. "No more business talk. Tell me something real." Julian's gaze didn't waver. "I don't like small talk. I'd rather sit in silence with someone honest than fill a room with empty noise." "Sounds lonely," she replied. Sometimes, he admitted, but honesty costs less in the long run. She tilted her head, "Then tell me honestly, why me? Why dinner?" His answer came without delay. "Because you don't look at me like the rest of them do." Her chest tightened. "And how do the rest of them look at you?" Julian took a sip of wine before answering. "Like I'm a Transaction A headline, a ladder rung." "And me?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. He leaned forward just slightly, like the words he was about to say couldn't afford to be overheard by the air itself. "When I look at you," he said, "I see something I'm afraid to lose." Elena's breath caught in her throat. There was something about the way he said it, not rehearsed, not perfect, just real. And maybe that was what scared her most of all. She lifted her glass again, the coolness grounding her, and let the moment hang between them. That's a dangerous thing to say, she murmured. Julian didn't move, only if it isn't true. She closed her eyes for a moment long enough to feel her heart stumble in its rhythm, and somehow, she already knew this was the beginning of something she wouldn't be able to forget. You don't even know me, Elena said, her voice low, laced with disbelief, as she shook her head. Julian's fingers traced the rim of his wine glass. In slow, thoughtful circles, I know enough. And just like that, something shifted in the space between them. Elena's throat tightened. This wasn't the kind of conversation she was used to. Most people tiptoed, uncertain, guarded. But Julian, he moved through the world with the kind of certainty that left no room for guessing. He wasn't afraid of emotions or of naming what he wanted. And now it seemed what he wanted was her. So tell me, she said, steadying herself. What exactly do you think you know? He didn't flinch. His gaze stayed anchored to hers. Calm. Certain. I think you don't trust easily, but you wish you could. You've convinced yourself that solitude is safer, that you're fine on your own, but inside there's a part of you that's tired. Tired of watching love pass you by while you stay, rooted in fear, her fingers curled against the edge of the table. Not because she was angry, but because his words hit too close to where she'd hidden things. That's a bold assumption, she replied, the defense weak on her tongue. His voice dropped softer now, not pressing, just present. Is it wrong? She looked away, eyes landing on the flickering candlelight between them, letting it shield her from his gaze. She wanted to say no, wanted to challenge him, but she couldn't because it wasn't wrong. It was painfully, soulfully true. You don't play fair, she murmured. Julian gave a faint smile. I never said I did. Silence stretched between them, not awkward but filled with questions. Neither had the courage to ask yet. Finally, he lifted his glass. Your turn. Tell me something real. Elena studied him. For a moment she considered retreating into something light, safe, forgettable. But instead she chose the truth. I used to want to write, she said. Not just edit stories, but create them. My own stories. My own voice. Julian leaned in slightly. Used to, she exhaled. Reality is messy. It doesn't always leave room for dreams. His expression darkened. Just a flicker of it. That's a terrible injustice. She gave a small shrug. It's just life. But Julian's voice came back steady, low, unwavering. It doesn't have to be. Something about the way he said it made her chest ache. Not from sadness, but from the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he meant it. Before she could answer, the waiter returned with dessert. An intricate chocolate torte, delicate and rich, but Elena barely tasted it. Her mind was still tangled in Julian's words, in the way he moved through the world like limits didn't apply to him. You talk like someone who's never been told. No, she said, picking up her fork, his lips twitched. That's because I don't hear it often. She took a bite, then shook her head. That explains a lot. Julian didn't blink. And yet you're still here. You haven't run, Elena set her fork down. Her gaze sharp now, not yet. There was a flicker in his eyes, approval, maybe, or something even deeper. I'll take that as a challenge. She wasn't sure whether to be charmed or terrified. By the time they pulled up in front of her building, the city had quieted into a soft hum. The air had grown cooler, clearer. And yet Elena's thoughts were more tangled than ever. Julian stepped out first and opened her door. His hand was there. Offered not forced, she accepted it, letting him help her out of the car, letting herself linger. I don't do this, she said quietly, eyes locked on the sidewalk beneath her heels. Julian's brow arched. Dinner. She shook her head. Letting someone in this quickly. He didn't say anything right away. Just reached for her hand, brushing his fingers against hers light. Unassuming. Maybe it's time you did. Elena swallowed hard, unsure whether the flutter in her chest was fear or something far more dangerous. Hope. Why, she whispered. His reply was quiet, but there wasn't an ounce of hesitation. because some things are worth the risk. The stillness that followed was louder than any noise. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment the only sound in the world was the rhythm of her own heart, unsteady and far too loud. Before she could second guess herself, Elena leaned up on her toes and pressed a soft kiss to the side of his face. Barely there. A whisper of a moment, but the way Julian's fingers tightened gently around hers told her everything he hadn't seen it coming. She stepped back. Breath uneven. Good night, Julian. He held her gaze, something unreadable flickering behind those storm blue eyes. Good night, Elena. And then she turned away, walking up the steps to her apartment, heart pounding like a secret trying to break free. With each step, something in her shifted like she'd just opened the door to something wild, something dangerous. And for once, she wasn't sure she wanted to close it. Back inside, Elena stared at her phone on the kitchen counter. She didn't touch it. She couldn't. Her thoughts were already too loud, too full of him. Of the way he looked at her, like she wasn't just seen, but understood. A knock interrupted the silence. She opened the door slowly, cautiously, and there he was, Julian, holding a small, elegant box. Wrapped in silver paper, his presence, as always, didn't need fanfare. I was in the neighborhood, he said casually. But his eyes, they told another story. Elena crossed her arms, arching a brow in the neighborhood. A ghost of a smile played at his lips. I may have taken a creative detour. He extended the box. She hesitated, then took it. Its weight, surprisingly solid in her hands. What is this? Open it. She untied the ribbon with careful fingers and lifted the lid. Inside sat a delicate gold bracelet, simple, refined, a single sapphire glinting in the center like a drop of midnight. It was beautiful, understated, thoughtful. Julian. I saw it, he said softly, and I thought of you. Her fingers grazed the cool metal, but her voice was tight. You can't just buy me things. Why not? Because... She struggled, grasping for words, because this isn't how it's supposed to work. Nothing about this is supposed to be normal, Elena, he said quietly. And that was the part that scared her most. Her pulse raced. That's exactly why it terrifies me. He didn't retreat. He didn't fill the space with empty reassurance. He just, stood there, present, unwavering. I don't do things halfway, he said. When I care about something, someone I show up, I choose them. Her hands pressed lightly against the doorframe, bracing herself. And what is it you're choosing right now? You, he answered, without pause. Her breath hitched. It wasn't a pickup line. It wasn't drama. It was a declaration, quiet, certain, irreversible. Elena's life had been built on caution, one guarded step at a time. But Julian Cross, he wasn't caution, he was thunder rolling in at midnight. He was the storm after years of silence. I don't know how to do this, she confessed, voice shaking with truth. He stepped closer. His presence wrapped around her like a quiet promise. Then let me show you, she laughed, but it came out thin, frayed. This is crazy. A hint of amusement glinted in his eyes. Probably her gaze dropped to the bracelet in her palm, then back to the man standing in her doorway. You're not going to let me run from this, are you? No, he said gently. Her eyes narrowed, a spark of frustration flickering. Alongside something dangerously close to surrender. You're impossible, and yet you're still standing here. She shook her head, but didn't step back. Didn't shut the door. Julian reached out, hand warm, as it found hers. Come with me, Elena. Hesitated. Where? His smile was quiet, but it reached his eyes. You'll see. There was something about his voice, low, certain, that made it impossible to say no. Against every bit of logic she usually relied on, Elena grabbed her coat and followed Julian into the night. The city stretched endlessly before them, a blur of the glowing windows and shadowed streets as the car wound its way through unfamiliar neighborhoods. He didn't tell her where they were headed, and for once she didn't ask. When they finally arrived, her breath caught A rooftop terrace, high above the sleeping city, wrapped in soft light. Twinkling strands of fairy lights, draped overhead, like stars, had been strung by hand. At the center, a small table set for two. No grand spectacle, no crowd, just stillness and intention. Elena turned to him, wonder, soft in her voice. You did all of this? Julian slipped his hands into his pockets. Well, I wanted to give you something that wasn't about money. Just about us? Her throat tightened. She wasn't used to this, to someone choosing her with such quiet clarity. She stepped closer, her fingertips brushing the edge of his sleeve. You really don't give up, do you? Not when it matters, he said simply. She exhaled her walls, cracking just a little. And this time, she didn't pull back. She let him pull out her chair, let herself be part of something soft and real as the evening unfolded. Elena felt the tension she carried begin to loosen. Julian wasn't just confidence and tailored suits. He was thoughtful, intentional. He remembered the little things. He asked questions and actually listened. He made her laugh, deep, unexpected laughter that she hadn't heard in her own voice for far too long. By the time dessert arrived, something inside her had shifted. Julian reached across the table, his fingers finding hers with a touch that was both grounding and electric. Tell me what you're thinking, he said. Elena looked at him, her heart loud in her chest. I think I might be in trouble. His thumb moved in slow circles against her hand. That depends, he murmured, on whether you're willing to fall. Her breath stilled. A storm of emotions pressed against her ribs, but as she looked at him, at the man who had walked into her life like a secret, waiting to be told, she realized something terrifying and beautiful. She was already falling, and that scared her. More than anything, Elena had spent her entire life holding herself together, keeping her feet on solid ground. But here on this rooftop, under these stars, she felt herself unraveling in the best way. Julian made her feel seen, and that was the most dangerous feeling of all. She gently pulled her hand back, needing space, needing clarity. This is moving fast. He didn't argue. He didn't rush to reassure her. It is, he agreed. She expected him to push, to offer charm instead of truth, but he just leaned back in his chair, eyes calm and focused. Then tell me what you need. The question knocked the breath from her, because no one had ever asked. Not like that. Not with the intention to understand. She breathed out slowly. I need to know. This isn't just another game. Something shifted in Julian's face, not anger, not offense, but something heavier, his expression sobered, his voice quiet. You think this is a game? I don't know, she admitted, hating how unsure she sounded. It's just men like you. He cut in, gently, already knowing where her mind had gone. Men like me. You walk into a room, and everyone looks. You're confident, successful. You probably have people chasing your attention. Every day, Julian let out a long, quiet breath. He shook his head. You think I enjoy any of that? Elena blinked. She hadn't expected that answer. He leaned forward, voice lowered but intense. It's exhausting. The assumptions, the noise, everyone wanting something except the truth. He paused, his gaze anchoring her in place. But with you, you didn't want anything from me. You just looked at me like I was a person, not a name, not a headline, not a performance. The wind swept gently across the rooftop, brushing her hair across her face. She didn't move to fix it because she couldn't look away from him. For the first time since the moment they met, she understood just how alone he must have felt in a world that applauded everything but sincerity. And somehow, in all of that noise, he had chosen to chase her, silence. Julian leaned forward, arms resting lightly on the table. I don't care about the attention, he said, his voice quiet but unwavering. I'm not looking for people who are drawn to the name or the money. I want something that feels real. Elena swallowed a part of her, wanted to look away from the honesty in his gaze, but she didn't. She believed him. God help her. She did. But believing didn't make the fear vanish. She reached for her glass, needing something, anything to hold on to. I don't know how to be. What you're looking for, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Julian didn't hesitate. I'm not asking you to be anything but yourself. His words sank into her like warm light, steady and unshakable. For a moment, she just stared at him, caught between disbelief and something dangerously close to hope. How had he unraveled her so easily? He didn't look away, didn't flinch. You don't give up, she murmured, shaking her head. He smiled softly, quietly. Not when it matters. She let out a breath, some invisible weight loosening in her chest. I still don't know what this is. Then let's find out together. There was no pressure in his voice, no clever line. Just patience, just a man offering something honest, in a world that rarely was. She nodded, and in that quiet gesture something shifted. It wasn't surrender, it was choice. And for the first time in a long time, Elena felt like she had chosen something for herself, something that didn't feel like a mistake. The weeks that followed moved like a dream, stitched together with soft moments and late-night laughter. They didn't fall into some whirlwind romance of lavish gestures and drama. No, Julian was different. He made space for her without asking her to change shape to fit into his world. He remembered how she liked her coffee and had it waiting when she was running late. He listened when she talked about manuscripts and difficult edits, not just nodding, but asking questions, real ones. And when he kissed her, for the first time, it wasn't about timing or perfect lines. It was slow, intentional, like he had been waiting for that moment and wanted to remember every detail of it. Elena had never fallen this quickly before. But this wasn't falling, it was becoming. One evening, as they strolled through the quiet rhythm of the city, Julian stopped without warning. In front of a warmly lit storefront, Elena blinked. A bookstore! He nodded toward the display, behind the glass journals, writing guides, blank pages waiting to be filled. You told me once, he said, that you used to dream about writing your own stories. Her heart stumbled in her chest. That was a long time ago, she whispered. Julian didn't move. So, she gave a soft, almost bitter laugh. It's not that simple. Why not? She couldn't answer. Not really. How could she explain the years of fear, of telling herself she wasn't good enough, of letting the world convince her to shrink? Because, what if I fail? She said finally. Julian didn't flinch. He didn't soften or soothe. He just held her gaze. And what if you don't? Her throat tightened. He reached for her hand and held it gently. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Elena. No one had ever said that to her. Not like this. Not like they meant it. Not like it was something she could actually believe. She turned to look at the bookstore again, the shelves glowing in warm amber light, and for the first time in years, she let herself imagine what it might be like to try. Months passed, quietly, boldly, beautifully. Elena began stepping into a version of herself she thought she had buried long ago. And beside her, never pushing, but always steady, was Julian, the man who hadn't just seen her, the man who helped her see herself again. Elena began writing again, not for approval, not for deadlines. Just because something inside her had finally whispered, it's time, and Julian. He was always there, never hovering, never pushing, just steady like gravity, the kind of quiet presence that didn't ask for credit, only gave it. And somewhere between the late-night scribbles on napkins and the mornings when doubt tried to win, she realized something. She loved him, not for his name or his success, or the way his confidence lit up a room like he belonged in every space he entered. She loved him because he saw her. He had walked into her life by chance, sat down beside her at a table she didn't even want to be at, and somehow, without force or flair, had reminded her that love could be simple, gentle, real. The day she signed her first book deal, his hand was at the small of her back, steady as ever. As she bent over the contract, the ink still drying when he leaned in, his voice low and certain. Told you it would happen? She laughed, shaking her head. You're impossible. He brushed a kiss to her temple. And yet, here we are. Elena turned to him, eyes shining, heart full. For years she had believed love was for other people. That big, wholehearted joy was something she'd only read about in the stories she edited. But standing there in his arms, she knew she had been wrong. Love had been waiting for her all along, and it had found her in the most unexpected of places. Later that evening, Elena stood alone on the rooftop terrace. The city a tapestry of lights beneath her, the cool night air wrapped around her, not unwelcome, just present, like a quiet witness. Julian was inside, taking a business call. His voice low and composed as always. She closed her eyes and let herself feel the moment. Her fingers instinctively found the delicate bracelet around her wrist, the one he had given her so early on. Back when everything still felt like too much, too fast, too unreal. That bracelet had become something of a talisman, a reminder of how far she had come, of how far they had come. Months ago, she was the woman who kept her dreams shelved, her hopes dimmed to protect herself from disappointment. Now she was someone who dared, someone who said yes to love. The terrace door clicked open behind her, and she didn't have to turn to know who it was. His presence settled beside her, warm and grounding. Are you tired? He asked, voice soft enough to blend with the breeze. She shook her head, just thinking. Julian looked out at the skyline, his hand finding hers, without hesitation. Good thoughts, I hope. She smiled faintly. Mostly, he didn't press, just held her hand, thumb tracing idle circles against her skin. She could have stayed like that forever, but something inside her stirred, a truth-wanting air. I never expected this, she murmured. You us. Julian turned, watching her with that same quiet intensity he always had. Neither did I. She studied him, searching for something. Doubt, hesitation, regret. But there was only certainty, and yet you never doubted it. He stepped closer, his fingers tightening around hers, just enough to anchor her. I knew what I wanted, her heart stuttered. And if I had walked away, she asked barely above a whisper. His eyes held hers, something unreadable flickering there, something honest. I would have let you, he said, because I'd never ask someone to stay who wasn't sure. Elena blinked, surprised, but I would have made sure you knew exactly what you were walking away from. She laughed, then a small, breathless sound that held too many things to name. You really are impossible. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, and yet she nodded, smiling back, the kind of smile that said, You're exactly where you belong. They say you're impossible, Elena murmured with a smile, leaning gently into Julian's side. He laced their fingers together, his touch, familiar, now comforting. I've heard that a few times, he replied, brushing his thumb over her knuckles. Well, she said softly, looking up at him, I don't regret staying. A hush settled between them, quiet, full, and steady. Julian's eyes met hers a softness there that didn't need grand gestures. Good, he said simply. You're awfully sure of yourself, she teased, though her voice held a tremble of emotion. His answer came without hesitation. Only when it comes to you, her breath caught. Then slowly, Julian shifted his hand, slipping into the inside pocket of his jacket. Elena blinked, her heart leaping, as he pulled out a small velvet box. Julian. His voice was calm, but his eyes, those steady blue-gray eyes, held something raw, something vulnerable. I've never wanted anything the way I want you, he said, now kneeling before her. I told you once that I don't do things halfway, and I meant it. He opened the box. Inside a ring, shimmered elegant, timeless, like everything he was. Loving you was never a question, Elena. You are the best decision I've ever made. Will you marry me For a heartbeat, the world held still, and then she nodded, tears slipping freely down her cheeks. Yes, she whispered. He exhaled something like relief, breaking across his face. As he slid the ring onto her finger and rose to his feet, Elena fell into his arms, laughter and love mingling on her lips. His kiss came, slow, reverent, like a promise, carved into the moment itself, and just like that, she knew this was it. This was home. The wedding was a quiet kind of magic, not extravagant, not excessive, just them. Every detail threaded with warmth and meaning. As Elena walked down the aisle, the soft swell of music around her, her eyes locked with Julian's. Her steps felt lighter than air, as if every part of her had been waiting for this single walk forward. When she reached him, he took her hands, grounding her with just one look. "You are," he whispered, "the best thing that's ever happened to me." Elena's voice trembled as she smiled. "And you are mine." Their vows weren't elaborate. They were honest, full of the messy, magnificent truth of how they found each other. And when Julian kissed her, time didn't just slow, it disappeared. It had always been only them. 1 year later, the late morning sun spilled golden light across their living room. Elena sat curled up in the corner of a deep chair, her hands holding a copy of her first published novel, her name, Elena Moore, printed boldly across the cover, a dream she had once tucked away quietly. Now, held in her palms, Julian stepped into the room and paused when he saw the book in her hands. He smiled, slow and warm. "Proud of yourself?" She looked up, her chest aching in the best way. "Proud of us." He crossed to her, pressed a kiss to her forehead, and whispered, "Told you it would happen?" She laughed, her fingers tugging at his sleeve. "Yes, yes, you were right." He grinned, settling beside her. "Say it again?" he murmured playfully. She rolled her eyes and leaned into him. "You were right." He kissed her again, deep, unhurried, full of the love they had built, brick by careful brick. And as she melted into him, Elena knew this wasn't a dream anymore. This was her life, her love, her forever. Sometimes the love that changes everything doesn't come with fireworks or fanfare. Sometimes it starts with a seat beside a stranger, a conversation, a glance that lingers longer than it should, and sometimes the person who feels too good to be true ends up being the one who shows you who you've been all along. So, to anyone listening, may you be brave enough to stay, open enough to be seen, and soft enough to believe that love true. Quiet, unwavering love will find you exactly where you are. Thank you for joining us in this story. If it touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a little reminder that forever isn't a fantasy, it's just waiting for the right moment to begin.